Hello and welcome to Pods Above Replacement, part of the Padres Hot Tub Podcast Network. My name is Raphie Cantor. I am the producer of Padres Hot Tub, and joining me from the Mile High City, he's just dropped a kettlebell on his toe. It's John Precoda.
Good morning, everybody. How we doing? How's my Juan Soto impression?
It's really good. It's scary, honestly. I thought you were shuffling into the box on that one. That was so good. How you doing this morning?
I am doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited. This is our second episode. We just launched on YouTube to rousing success. We had a lot of Patreon and listener engagement on our first video. We're really appreciative of that. We're glad that you guys like what we have coming out. Of course, we also have our Padres Hot Tub Patreon community, Padres Hot Tub, being a community where you can come and hang out, not just to listen to podcasts, but also to chat about anything under the sun. And we have our own little Pods Above Replacement channel on the Padres Hot Tub Discord, and you can join too. $5 a month is the starting rate. Go to patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub to join, patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub. And we had some shouts for a few different players to talk about. We will hopefully get to all of them in short order, but the one who attracted the most attention was a young man by the name of Trent Grisham. Trent Grisham is going to be our episode 2 today. Opening thoughts about Trent Grisham. What are your impressions of this player as he hits the halfway point of team control under the San Diego Padres?
This is going to be a fun one. I think he is a player that kind of draws a lot of arguments one way or another on what he is. I remember last year around this time, we were discussing the core 4 Padres players, and that was at the time Machado, Tatis, and like Trent Grisham was solidly in there, and whether Cronenworth was also in there was the debatable question. And now it's suddenly like, what is he? Is he a potential star who's struggling, or is he a mediocre player that is, just roster periphery?
Or, John, is he primed for a breakout? And we're going to talk about that later on. But just to kind of do a little bit of background on Trent, first of all, he's 26 years old. This is going to be his age 26 season. Important to remember, drafted 15th overall in 2015 by the Milwaukee Brewers. And just something to note when talking about prospects, often the first round pedigree is brought up a lot, where if a player, struggles early on in their minor league career or even in their major league career, one thing that often gets brought up is if they were taken in the first round, it's because they were undoubtedly highly touted by scouts, oftentimes for certain physical abilities or intangibles that people thought could develop. So worth noting that being drafted 15th overall, that was the case for Trent Grisham. And I thought it would be fun to go back and see what the scouts were saying about him around that time. And Baseball Prospectus has a 2016 scouting report that was done by James Fisher when Trent Grisham was in low A. In this report, he was rated as a grade 60 overall prospect. And I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about what that means. Baseball talent is evaluated on a scale that's known as the 20/80 scale. And it's called the 20/80 scale simply because 20 is the lowest rating and 80 is the highest rating. And like any kind of rating system, it's very rare to find a 20 and it's very rare to find an 80. Most people land somewhere on more of what you would understand as a bell curve distribution. And the middle ranking, 50, is typically seen as what an average everyday MLB player would be. So if you're giving someone a 50 ranking or a certain attribute or tool that they have, a 50 ranking, you're saying, hey, this will play for like an average everyday MLB player. On either side of that, a 40 overall ranking, which you'll see frequently because there are a lot of 40 overall prospects, is someone who we consider about replacement level. So pods above replacement. Anyone below 40 would be a pod below replacement. Anyone above 40 would be a pod above. And that's someone who, sometimes you hear the term quad A thrown out, which is someone who's going to shuttle back and forth between AAA and the majors. That's about a 40 ranking. Finally, a 60 ranking, which is what Trent Grisham was given in this 2016 scouting report, is generally seen as an all-star, at least the conversation for being an all-star. So Trent Grisham in 2016 given a 60 overall prospect ranking, and this is what James Fisher said. Drafted in the first round of the 2015 draft out of Richland High School in Texas, Trent Grisham is a physical center fielder with an advanced offensive skill set. He combines an elite bat speed with an advanced batting eye to control the strike zone and stays within himself. Defensively, he patrols center field with solid reads off the bat and a plus arm that plays up in center with carry through the bag. Profiles as an everyday center fielder with a bat that will keep him at the top of the lineup. His hit and his arm tool were given a 60 ranking, and his power and base running speed and glove were given a 50. Now, I should note in the scouting report, it actually said Trent Clark, not Trent Grisham.
Yeah, it was Trenton Clark. Yeah, so that year in 2015, the Rangers had the 4th overall pick. AJ Preller is obviously a big part of the Rangers organization at that time and their drafting considerations. And Trenton Clark was a kind of sexy high school outfielder, which to me sounds like almost exactly like what AJ Preller would prefer to draft, is that like toolsy high school, center field up the middle bat with like projection that he could possibly be, an all-star rather than just like a average major league player. They ended up drafting Dylan Tate, who was a University of California, Santa Barbara pitcher. Obviously didn't pan out to be very much. So they went college arm, which seems like almost the exact opposite of what AJ Preller would want at the top of a draft. I'm positive that they were, looking at people like Trenton Clark, Trent Grisham at the time. So I bet that his like scouting during that time, it gave him a little bit of I kind of want this guy. I think that I might need to get him someday.
Yeah, and so again, he had high stock coming out of the first round of the draft in 2015. Then he goes to the minors, and his numbers kind of drop. He starts to struggle. And Fangraphs, which has a great database on their prospect rankings through the 2017 season, did not rank him very highly. He was, in 2017, given a 45 overall ranking, which, again, is kind of in that, is he every day? Is he kind of a quad A guy? Who knows? We're going to find out. And he was only Milwaukee's 9th overall prospect. 2018, he shoots up to 50 overall. He's Milwaukee's 6th prospect. But after 2018, he has just kind of a brutal season in the minors. And by the time the beginning of 2019 rolls around, he's down to a 40 overall. So Fangraphs is saying this guy is kind of a replacement level player, and he's Milwaukee's 14th ranked prospect. Just to give you an idea, some people in that system at that time were Lewis Brinson was kind of the overall number 1 prospect. Brendan Woodruff was in that system. Josh Hader was in that system. So a lot of talent coming out of the Brewers at that time. And then 2019 happens, and he has this breakout year that I know caught the eye of one AJ Preller. In 2019, he starts out in Double-A, and his slash line is 254 batting average, 371 on base, 504 slugging, and that accumulates to a 150 WRC plus. And I want to talk really quickly about WRC plus because it's a number that or a statistic you're gonna hear a lot on this show. Basically, WRC plus and WOBA is another statistic weighted on base average that you'll hear sometimes. But WRC plus stands for weighted runs created plus, and the idea behind that is that not all hits are created equal. A double is worth more than a single, a triple is worth more than a double, etc. But batting average counts them as the same. On base percentage counts them as the same. So why should we rate players in that way? If someone's hitting doubles the same amount that someone else is hitting singles, that player is more valuable, and they're not even twice as valuable. They're more than twice as valuable because people who hit doubles end up on second base are much more likely to score than people who are ending up on first base. So weighted runs created is a stat that kind of tries to encapsulate that. It tries to encapsulate the totality of an offensive production that a player produces. And that plus sign that's on the end, all that means is that it's normalized so that a rating of 100 is the average player of that level. So if someone has a WRC plus of 100, it means that for baseball that year, Major League Baseball, if that's the level they're in, they were an average hitter. They created runs at an average level. Trent Grisham in Double A in 2019 had a 150 WRC plus. It's a nice round number. That's why I like it. And it means that he was 50% better at creating runs in Double A than the average Double A player at that time. And to just give you an idea, I believe, this is off the top of my head, Manny Machado had a 153 WRC plus in Major League Baseball last year. So, this is Manny Machado-like production in Double A. So obviously that's going to jump off of the page. Things get way better when he gets to Triple A. He is slashing 381, 471, 776 with a 194 WRC plus. And that is like basically Juan Soto levels of Mike Trout levels of run creation in a short sample size in AAA, but combined with those AA stats, really jumps off the page. He comes up to Major League Baseball at the end of the year, has a cup of coffee, doesn't hit quite as well, 231, 328, 410, but it's still good for a 92 WRC plus. So he was about 8% worse than the average MLB hitter in that time, but playing a very, very good center field, which we'll get to later in the show. But John, I want to kick it over to you and talk about how one Trent Grisham ended up on the San Diego Padres.
Yeah, so that same 2019 season, he had an infamous play in right field during the playoffs, wherein Juan Soto hit a base hit to right. Trent Grisham misplays it, costs his team a run. There was basically some outrage at the time. It was one of those clutch moments, poor defensive play. It was one play. The ball had a strange spin on it. It was Juan Soto smashing a ball. So he had a little bit of a goof probably in right field, but I would imagine that kind of led to at least a consideration of trading him. So he does end up getting traded to us that offseason. We get him as well as Zach Davies in exchange for Eric Lauer and Luis Urias. At the time, Luis Urias was going to be the second baseman to Tatis's short. We were all excited about Luis Urias at the time. Just real quick going over how that trade ended up working out so far for the Brewers. Eric Lauer has provided 2.5 F4, Luis Urias 4.7 F4 for a total of 7.2 F4 that we gave them. Zach Davies gave us 1.4 F4. Trent Grisham has put up 6.5 F4, which is the highest of any of the players involved in the trade. And so thus far, it's been kind of a 7.2 F4 that we've given away for 7.9 F4 that we got back. Basically the same, very, very close, a rounding error of a difference. There is a difference, though, in that Trent Grisham has 3 years of control left, and Urias has 3 years of control left. Eric Lauer has 2 more years of control left. So overall, they have more years of control, about the same amount of total F work on each side of the trade. However, we did get the best player, at least so far, over the course of the trade.
And really quickly, John, important to note, Zach Davies, he could have been on the Padres for longer. He ended up getting sent to Chicago, and he was one could argue the centerpiece, I say that in jest, of the trade that brought Yu Darvish and Victor Caratini to San Diego. So, not entirely useless, even though he only gave us one season on the Padres.
Yeah, that's true. He was definitely not the centerpiece, but he was an arm that they could justify to fans that they weren't giving away Darvish for just minor league players, all of whom were about 4 or 5 years away. So he did have some value in that respect as well. You're right.
So going on and looking forward, Trent Grisham, like we said, 3 years on the Padres, 3 years of rookie minimum deal that made him, very efficient. But now he's going into his first arbitration year, and we want to take a look forward at what Trent Grisham might go ahead and cost the Padres moving forward after 2023.
Yeah, so MLB Trade Rumors is my favorite arbitration projection system. They're usually really good at it. I did some comparables to what Grisham was projected, and those comparables ended up being former Padres in Manny Margot and Zach Eflin. So as you know, we don't normally go to arbitration with our players, which probably it means that we pay a little bit of a premium on basically everybody, because they know that we don't want to go to arbitration. So they probably say, let's get a little bit more than maybe what is projected. What was projected for Grisham this year was $2.6 million, which is exactly the same as what was projected for Zach Eflin and Manny Margot 3 years ago. He actually ended up getting $3.2 million, which is possibly $600,000 extra that maybe he probably would have got had they actually gone to arbitration. So his projections are probably going to be more than Eflin or Margot had as they went, and probably a little bit more every single year. So Eflin and Margot had very similar arbitrations. They started at the 2.6 that Grisham was projected this year, and then they went up to about 4 million, and then up to about 6 million. So Grisham's starting higher than that because we gave him more money. So you would expect him not to do that, 2.6, about 5, about 7. He's probably a little bit more. So he's starting at 3.2. If we follow their career paths, and Grisham has a similar career path, which is tough to tell, because if he breaks out, then he would get a lot more money. If he's incredibly poor, then he'll get less money. But projecting it would be something like he gets 3.2 million this year, and then maybe closer to 6 million, and then closer to 9 or 10 million in his last year of arbitration before he hits free agency, assuming he kind of follows a similar path to the path that he's going on so far.
Yeah, and again, those numbers are subject to change depending on what kind of player Trent Grisham is going forward. So, and that's going to be the subject of this episode. It's worth a quick talk about who Trent Grisham has been on the Padres so far. The first thing people know about him, he has won 2 gold gloves in center field, both in the pandemic-shortened season of 2020 and last year in 2022. Now, of course, the offense has been a little bit of a wild ride, so to speak. In 2020, Trent Grisham had that kind of breakout offensive year, 251 average, 352 on base, 456 slugging, and again, that magic number, a 122 WRC plus, so 22% average, percent better than the average hitter. And that was all good for 2.2 F-WAR in just under 60 games. So small sample size here, but also he just generated a ton of production in that time. That scales out to a 6 F-WAR season. And again, bringing up Manny put up 7 last year. So not quite Manny Machado levels. But if Trent Grisham had played the entire season the way that he was playing, played a 162 game season the way that he was playing in the pandemic shortened season, that's the kind of numbers that he's putting up, a few degrees below Manny Machado. 2021 happens, and he has an interesting stat line that we'll get to in a second. 242, 327, 413, 103 WRC plus, so he's about an average hitter. And in the same amount of time, or basically he had 2.2 F4 in that season as well, in 132 games. So in double the amount of games, he produced just as much value as he did the year before, which goes to show you kind of how wacky an outlier that 2020 season was. And then last year, last year, Trent Grisham's stat line, he had a 184 average, 284 on base, 341 slugging, an 83 WRC plus, which is not good, but it's also much better than I thought it was just looking at that stat line. And yet he still put up 2.1 F4 in 152 games. So every season he's put up the same amount of value in very different amounts of games and very different amounts of plate appearances, largely on the back of his defense. And I wanted to break down Trent Grisham's career in a slightly different way. Instead of those 3 seasons, I want to break it up into 2 parts. There was the 2020 season, as we talked about, and then 2021 through May 21st. And because on May 21st, Trent Grisham gets hurt. He has a left heel bruise that breaks up his season, and it keeps him off the team for 3 weeks. And in that 2020 season through that first part of 2021, Trent Grisham had 406 plate appearances. 5 to 600 is generally considered a full season's workload. So not quite a full season, but during that 406 plate appearances, he hit 271, 364, 479, a 131 WRC plus. that's an all-star. Like, no two ways about it. That is an all-star, especially playing the level of center field that he's playing. He misses 3 weeks, as I mentioned, for the left heel bruise. And then from the middle of 2021 all the way through the end of 2022, he has 897 plate appearances. And he's hitting 198, 292, 354 for an 84 WRC plus, and that is just as bad as it sounds. It's not good. It is quite bad. So the question really is, who is the real Trent Grisham? And that's kind of what's driven a lot of the discourse about Trent Grisham amongst Padres circles. And John, I know you did a little bit more digging into the StatCasty side of Trent Grisham's offense, and we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so recently there's been a outcry about the fact that maybe major league hitters are swinging too much at baseballs, and I think this is kind of a little bit of a stat head driven idea that is also maybe the reason why people just roll their eyes towards folks that are a little bit more stat heavy, and that's because basically what they're saying is there's only 33% of pitches that are worth swinging at. And that's because if you swing at pitches that are on like the corner of the zone or outside the zone, you have a negative run expected value, which makes sense because you're either going to be swinging at balls that would have given you a ball and instead it's a strike, or a poorly hit ball probably. Or if it's on kind of the corner of the strike zone, those are usually pitchers' pitches, and you're putting them in play, and you're putting them in plays, poorly. So basically, what the call out has been among stat heads is that you should really only swing at a baseball if it's essentially right down the middle. No matter what pitch it is, you should wait for your pitch right down the middle, and those pitches are the only ones that have positive run expected value when you swing at them. That is a very simplistic approach because I think that a large part of baseball is the pitcher trying to make you think a pitch is down the middle and then it breaks away from down the middle. So the little stats that are referred to are usually like if you swing at a pitch outside the zone, on average you have about a slugging percentage of about 0.207 and an exit velocity below 80 at about 79.5. However, if you swing inside the zone, slugging percentage goes up near 500 and exit velocity is about 90, which is not, it's not, breaking news that you should swing at strikes and avoid pitches outside the zone. Obviously, it's harder than these stat heads say. That being said, Trent Grisham is kind of a star in this approach. He doesn't swing at pitches outside the zone very much. And honestly, he doesn't swing at pitches inside the zone very much. And the ones that he does swing at do tend to be down the middle, although he takes those more often than he should as well. Hearing actual baseball players talk about this kind of approach and like when they've been approached with this thought process that maybe you should start swinging at fewer pitches, there's been some interesting conversations that have been had. Adrian Beltre, at the end of his career, was talking about how at his age he can't just get to every ball in every portion of the strike zone that he used to be able to do when he was younger. So he started to have a kind of a top-down approach where if a pitch was towards the top of the strike zone, he would be much more likely to swing because if it breaks, it still breaks into the strike zone. Whereas when a ball is low in the strike zone, maybe it stays at the bottom of the strike zone and you can hit it, but there's a great chance that it has movement that brings it out of the strike zone and you're going to have poor contact or be chasing balls. So basically him and then Mark Kanya has also said this, is that their favorite approach is basically look for the high pitch, and then if it breaks into the strike zone, perfect. That's a pitch, close to down the middle that I can, let fly. It's kind of like a knuckleball approach. If it's high, let it fly. If it's low, let it go. So that's a realistic solution to the problem. If a ball is towards the top of the strike zone, maybe that's the one that you swing at. And sometimes you'll be chasing balls out of the zone, but less often than if a ball is low in the zone. So Trent Grisham, like I said, he's kind of a star in this regard. He does not chase very much. If a ball is outside the strike zone, he seldom swings at it. In fact, way lower than league average. However, he also takes balls down the middle. I think we've all seen that a million times where there'll be two strikes on him and there's a pitch right down the middle and you just see him spin and walk away. And that's frustrating to us as fans, but from a numbers perspective, it's also costing him, runs added. He takes pitches down the middle, and last year he took pitches down the middle he ended up costing his team 12 runs by taking pitches down the middle, which normally people swing at pitches down the middle very, very often. And so normally that's a positive value. You're creating runs by pitches that are going right down the middle. His was actually very negative. So he had negative 17 runs created when pitches were down the heart of the plate because he's taking pitches too much, and because when he's swinging at pitches down the middle, he's really not creating a lot of value. Since 2019, he is the 13th worst hitter, according to WOBA, at pitches down the heart of the plate. So if you throw him a pitch down the heart of the plate, he is the 13th worst at creating value on that pitch in the whole major leagues. His name compares to Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Elvis Andrus, Robbie Grossman. These are the types of names who perform similarly on pitches down the heart of the plate. And just to go over WOBA, you went over WRC+. So WOBA is similar in that it tries to value a home run as more than a single, and a single as more than a walk, because they're not exactly the same. A home run, according to slugging percentage, which is used in OPS, is 4 times as valuable as a single. In reality, it's about 2.5 times as valuable as a single in terms of runs created. So they put it on a scale that is more similar to on-base percentage. So you can think of WOBA as basically the same as on-base percentage. If you have a 320 WOBA, that's about average. And then, 20 points above, you're pretty dang good. 20 points below, you're pretty dang bad. So just like an OBP, so if you have a 340 OBP, that's pretty good. If you have a 300 OBP, that's pretty bad. And you can kind of think of WOBA as the same in terms of how much value they created. And Trent Grisham had a 328 WOBA on pitches right down the heart of the plate, which is barely better than the average hitter does on any ball in any pitch. The league average is 364 on pitches down the heart of the plate. He was 328. So not only does he take a lot of pitches right down the heart of the plate, but when he swings at pitches down the heart of the plate, he doesn't perform well. So I don't know. It's concerning for me that, his change in approach, it sounds like this year, is that he's going to be trying to swing and do more damage on pitches down the heart of the plate, which in all honesty is a great idea because he does take way too many pitches down the heart of the plate. However, he still doesn't perform well on pitches down the heart of the plate. So you have a ceiling on how much better he can be if he's that poor on pitches, that he's looking to hit. In addition to that, he is one of the worst Padres at hitting velocity. So in the past few years on pitches 95 miles per hour or higher, he has a 250 WOBA, which is just exceedingly poor, just amazingly poor. As a comparison on these pitches 95 miles an hour, Manny Machado is at 365 and Tatis is 354. So pitches 95 miles an hour and faster include pitches that are 100 miles an hour. So, it's harder to hit that kind of velo, but he is bad at it, just very bad. 250 WOBA, that's about the same as Austin Nola on pitches that are 95 miles per hour and higher. And the thing that is frustrating about him is that he does sometimes cause damage on fastballs, on four-seam fastballs. He hit 3 home runs on them in the postseason last year when he was America's greatest hitter. Against Scherzer, the fastball that he hit was 94.3 miles per hour. The DeGrom fastball was 100.3, and the Haney fastball was 93.3. So he was smashing those pitches, and he was taking walks, and then something switched, and suddenly at the end of the postseason, he was 0 for 19 with 9 strikeouts. So there's times at which he looks like America's greatest hitter, but he gets lost at the plate for long periods of time, and when that happens, his numbers just tank overall. And then one last thing about him that I have on him from last year is that he had a precipitous drop-off in his line drive percentage, and he basically just traded out line drives for more ground balls and more fly balls. He did have a higher launch angle, and so in that regard, he was somewhat similar to Cronenworth, although Cronenworth wasn't grounding out as much, and ground balls are just not good. And he didn't have as big of a drop-off in line drives. Trent Grisham went from 26.4% line drives, so over a quarter of the time, to 14.8% line drives. And line drives are the best contact in baseball. They're the best. They're the thing that you want is line drives, and he was hitting them almost never. So 14.8% of the time. He had a lot of people say that, well, he had a terrible BABIP last year, batting average on balls in play, and he did. It was 231, and his career average is about 274. But what's different about last year compared to all the other years is that he had way lower line drives, and line drives make your BABIP go higher. So it's hard to argue that he just had poor luck in terms of his BABIP, because also his contact profile was much worse. So really, he was just creating worse contact. Of course, he's going to have a lower BABIP.
Yeah, and just really quickly for folks who aren't familiar with BABIP, batting average on balls in play, basically it's batting average on balls that they take away strikeouts, home runs, walks, obviously, because that doesn't count towards batting average. Basically, any ball that you put into the field is a batting average on balls in play, is interpreted on that. And the idea behind it is it can tell how lucky or not a player is. Over the course of a career, it takes a huge sample size to get a good BABIP reading. It can tell you kind of how lucky or unlucky someone is, because if, for instance, as John just mentioned, Trent Grisham had a 231 BABIP in 2022 against his 274 career average, it means that those, that bloop fly ball that didn't, drop that one afternoon in Cincinnati that, someone made a really good play on that might have dropped in 2020, you can identify and say, oh, okay, maybe he was a little luckier in 2020 than he was in 2022. And it's not necessarily a reflection on how good of a hitter he was when, that odd ball doesn't drop. So really interesting stat to see, players being lucky. League average is about 300, no matter who the hitter is. So for Trent Grisham to have a career 274 BABIP means that he's not really hitting the ball that hard. He's not really putting it in places that he's going to be in a position to, quote unquote, get lucky, John.
Yeah, so one other just key point on BABIP is that it's usually best to reference it in relationship to the player's own BABIP, because different players have different contact quality and different speed. So like Tatis, if he puts a ball in play, it's probably hit hard and he's fast. So there's a good chance that he's going to get a hit on a grounder up the middle, or any kind of contact he makes is hard. Therefore, it's more likely to get through a hole, right? But Trent Grisham, he's fast, but he doesn't hit the ball like even close to as hard as Tatis does. So he's just going to have a lower BABIP in general. So it's usually best to say like this player was lucky or not by comparing him to himself. Like a player with about a 300 BABIP, if he suddenly has a 220 BABIP, then you can say he probably had some bad luck or something changed drastically. In this case, I would bet that it's a little bit of both. I think he probably had a little bit of bad luck, but also he wasn't hitting line drives, and those are the best thing to drive up a batting average. So I think it's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, BABIP, a great stat to use in concert with others, but using it on its own can be kind of tricky. And just, speaking on that, before we move on to talking about Trent Grisham's wonderful defense, one of the things that was brought to my attention by an Eno Saris tweet in February, he pointed out the top second half surgers in hard hit rate, hard hit being someone who has an exit velocity over 95 miles an hour. And this is the amount of hard hits they had between the first half of the season and the second half of the season and how much it climbed. Trent Grisham, number one in all of Major League Baseball, had a hard hit rate that was 22% higher in the second half of the year than the first half of the year. Something that also happened at that time, his launch angle shot up. Around July of last year, something happened in Trent Grisham. I'm kind of vexed because all of the other stats are like basically exactly the same. His swing rate's the same, his contact rates, like his everything. But his launch angle and his exit velocity started to climb in July, and they didn't stop. One of the things that's been pointed out, especially on Twitter, at Too Much Morton, is a great follow for anyone who wants more film breakdown on Padres players. He pointed out is that Trent Grisham, in his 2020 season, his batting stance was more upright. And then in 2021 and 2022, he started to crouch a little bit more. And towards the end of last season, he did start to stand up a little bit more, as we saw in 2020. And people have noted in spring training this year, he's back to being a little more upright. So, don't want to read too much in the tea leaves on that because it's just a batting stance, but you never know. Maybe he's worked on these mechanics and he's taken notice. So that is something to keep our eye on. John, anything you want to add before we move on to defense?
Yeah, so I saw that tweet, and it's one of those things that gives you excitement. Oh, he's hitting the ball harder. He's hitting the ball with better launch angle. This is exciting stuff. But if you look at the numbers on how he performed in the first half and the second half, he performed the same in the second half as he did in the first half. He had a higher hard hit percent, but his hard hit percentage in the first half was so low that of course you're gonna be higher just by being mediocre. His WOBA was in the first half was 281, and remember I said 320 is like the same thing as on base percentage. So if 320 is average and you're hitting 281, that's terrible. In the second half it was 280, which is even worse. So he was bad on both the first half and second half. In the second half he was striking out way more. And yeah, you can say we're excited about his higher hard hit percentage, but I don't know if you remember down the stretch, he got benched for Jose Azocar. When we were going into the playoffs, we were wondering, is Jose Azocar the starting center fielder for the Padres going forth in the playoffs? And had Trent Grisham not had a good performance against Scherzer, I bet that he would have at least been starting consistently against left-handed pitchers.
So, Trent Grisham, who is he? Who is he behind the plate? We're not really sure. We're figuring that out. One thing we know for certain about Trent Grisham is that he's a damn good center fielder. And the fun part about baseball statistics, sabermetrics, is that it's an evolving field. Offensive statistics are, at this point, really good. Bill James, obviously started working on some of the stuff in the 70s. It's been evolving in a considerable manner ever since. Fielding metrics, however, are still we're kind of on the cutting edge of those right now. We're still trying to figure out the best way to measure how good someone is at defense. And StatCast, luckily, has opened the floodgates, really, because we have metrics on people's speed, starting position, on the field that we just simply didn't have prior to, not even like 2015 when batting StatCast started. Like 2020 is when a lot of this stuff happened in the field. And the stat that's very in vogue right now for defense is outs above average. This is the kind of core StatCast defensive metric. And really quickly, what outs above average is, it's a cumulative stat, so it adds up over the course of a season. And basically, kind of in what we were talking about with WRC Plus and WOBA, where not all hits are created the same way. Not all outs are made the same way. A running and diving catch should be worth more than a can of corn pop-up. And that's what outs above average is trying to correct for. So kind of really, really, really quickly, the idea essentially being that if someone makes a catch that only 25% of people make, they should be credited for that. So they essentially get a plus 0.75 because that's the difference between 25 and 100. That's to their name. And that basically says, oh, hey, they are, 3/4 of an out above average. Same thing goes for someone who fails to make that catch. You're going to subtract minus 0.25 from them because, hey, only 25% of people make that catch. So we shouldn't, harm them worse than, an average catch. So all of that's to say, when we're talking about Trent Grisham, we're talking about outs above average because he's a very above average defender. And in 2020, he had 8 outs above average, which led all of Major League Baseball for center fielders. 2021, he had 5. That was 14th in Major League Baseball. But again in 2022, 17 outs above average. First in Major League Baseball. The next closest person was 14. So, obviously those are the 2 years that he won the Gold Glove when he was the first in outs above average at his position in Major League Baseball. And I want to dive kind of more into the specifics of that because when we talk about Trent Grisham and his ability to see the ball, when I think of Trent Grisham playing defense, I'm thinking of diving catches to his left or his right. Taking incredibly swift action to get to the ball and laying out. One of the things I'm not thinking about when I think about Trent Grisham is him robbing home runs, which I think is something that is a rare occurrence. But, for instance, when I think of Torrey Hunter, maybe it was because it was, the Major League Baseball All-Star game, I think of him, getting up and robbing a homer. And one of the things that's fascinating about Trent Grisham is that he's really good moving to his right. He's really good moving to his left. He's pretty good moving in. He's just kind of average at moving back. He doesn't have any outs above average over the course of his career moving back. And we can talk about some of those reasons as we move on into his progression. John?
Yeah, so after the 2020 season, he saw that and talked about the fact that he wasn't as good going back on baseballs and how high his numbers would have been, because he was first in the major leagues in 2020, and how high his numbers would have been had he been good on going back on baseball. So that offseason, he said that he was working very hard on navigating like the Petco center field wall in order to make sure that he was really good at going back on baseballs. So he has been working on that. It hasn't shown over the past 2 years that he's gotten any better at it, but he is at least aware of that fact and probably still working on it.
Yeah, and awareness can be something that, just knowing that you need to do something better can lead to improvement. Before we get into the specifics of outs above average and why it is the way it is, one thing I thought was interesting in that scouting report that we read in 2016, he was given a 60 grade rating on his arm. Basically saying, we think this guy has an all-star level cannon that's going to perform well out in center field. Over the course of his career, Trent Grisham, he ranks 74th in throws from center field out of, I think, about 104 players during that time. So not only does he have a, not above average arm, he has kind of a below average arm. And John, I know you had a thought into how that plays into defensive metrics.
Yeah, well, it's just that OAA doesn't account for your arm strength. So you can have the wettest of wet noodles and still have an amazing outs above average. So the fact that he has a relatively mediocre, especially for center fielders, arm in center field, we're all saying that he's one of the best center fielders in baseball, and he is at catching baseballs. I don't know exactly how much his arm plays into it, but it takes away from his overall value in center field. So one of the ways in which StatCast breaks down how good or not good someone is at getting to baseballs is their jump. And a jump is kind of self-explanatory. You get a jump on a ball. Like what does it feel like? But the jump gets even more granular in the way that Major League Baseball defines it. There's kind of three parts to a jump. There's the reaction, their initial move. There's the burst, which is basically once they're running full speed, how are they performing? And there's the route, which is, okay, there's the straight line route that a computer can calculate and say this is the most efficient path to the ball. How close or not close was this player in following that route? So Trent Grisham's reaction, again, reaction is defined as the first 1.5 seconds after the ball is hit. It's pure gut instinct. You see the ball, where am I going? I would go so far as to say Trent Grisham is a god at reaction. I think it's one of those things that it's kind of hard to teach. You can, but again, it's instinct. It's one of those things where when we talk about like elite athletes, a lot of times it's just they have instincts that other people do not have, and that is Trent Grisham in a nutshell. He is, over his career, in 2020 he had 2.5 feet above average, which was first in MLB at that year. 2021 he had 2.6, which was second in MLB. And in 2022, he had 2.1 feet above average, which was fifth in MLB. So this is, we're a top 3, 4, 5% guy in reacting to the way that the ball moves. The next part of jump is the burst. As I mentioned, it's once you're moving kind of full tilt, full speed, how are you performing against the average player? And this is where speed really becomes a factor. The players with the highest burst ratings are the players who are going to have
just like lights out speed. I'm thinking of someone like maybe like Michael A. Taylor or someone else who's going to be patrolling center field in that manner. Byron Buxton even. Trent Grisham, only 0.5 feet above average last year. 32nd in Major League Baseball. Again, that's about out of 100 players. So yes, Trent Grisham, is he fast? Yeah, sure, kind of. When you think of a center fielder, you think of speed, and I actually don't think Trent Grisham kind of comes in at that level. This is kind of where he's falling back to earth a little bit. But the most interesting part about Trent Grisham is the way the route he takes the ball, the way he gets the ball, his direct route versus his actual route. And for my money, someone who is mildly educated about the sport of baseball, big fan. This is the part of defense that I actually think you can improve with coaching and practice the most, because again, like we said, reaction, that is just pure instinct. That is God-given talent in some way. Burst, that's speed. And can you get faster? Of course you can get faster, but it's a physical talent, and for some people there's just going to be a ceiling on it just based off of their genetics and everything. Route is something that you practice. It's something you practice over and over and over again. In 2022, Trent Grisham had minus 1.5 feet below average. That's the third worst route taking in Major League Baseball, and that's consistent throughout his career. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head for 2020 and 2021, but he is a bad route taker. So he is making amazing catches in center field, kind of in spite of the route that he takes. And John, I know you had a comparison to make to give us some context on route.
Yeah, and the comparison is Jackie Bradley Jr. Jackie Bradley Jr. has also always had a inefficient route despite being a good center fielder overall, and he's been asked about that in the past. He's been asked, why do you take such a poor route? You're such a good center fielder. And his rationale was that he does it on purpose so that any ball that's going to be easy to catch, he gets behind it basically. He does like a half circle so that just to make sure, like maybe my route isn't perfect, but there's no way I'm not going to catch this baseball. He doesn't miss baseballs because of his poor route. He just takes a poor route as like a conservative effort so that he's not, going too close and letting it go over his head. And so I would imagine that probably Trent Grisham is doing a little bit of a similar thing. So on baseballs that he knows he can catch, he's taking a route to get behind it, which is obviously not the most efficient route. Just one thing on jump overall, and you've just been going through all the parts of jump, is that I think in general, it is one of the least appreciated portions of being an outfielder, because if you're watching a baseball game on television, it's the exact thing that you don't see. You don't see the jump. The ball's hit to a player and you see him catching it. So if he's making diving catches, it looks like he's a great player. But if he had a poor jump and he had to make a diving catch because he had a poor jump, we don't see that. So I think that Trent Grisham, you see him playing in the outfield on television, you can say, oh, he's a pretty good outfielder. I wouldn't say that he's the best. But I think one of the reasons is because one of the things that he is best at, unless you're going to baseball games and watching him, you're not seeing him get that jump. So I think he's probably a little bit underappreciated, and that might be why like our eye test doesn't maybe value him as much as the computers do.
Absolutely. So before we move on from defense, I wanted to get your thoughts on, do we rate Trent Grisham properly as a defender? Because it's one of those things where it's like, it feels like we do because he has 2 gold gloves, and we think of him as this glove first guy, and that is how we reward it. But I mean, when I look at the numbers, and I also look at kind of his F4 overall player values in concert with his offensive statistics, and I think about just how much WAR values this guy's defense, where he can be in 2022 abysmal. Like I honestly don't think we said that enough. He was an abysmal offensive player last year, and it was just from an eye test perspective painful seeing Trent Grisham come up to the plate last year. And I say that as someone who's a huge fan of his. And and he still produced over 2 F-WAR, which is again about an everyday Major League Baseball player, which is like saying like he could be a 0 at the bottom of the lineup and still provide the value of an everyday MLB baseball player. So, John, how do you think we rate Trent Grisham as a defender? Are we making a big enough deal? Is he properly rated? What do you think?
I mean, the computers say that he's fantastic. So, I mean, I don't know how we could rate him differently than the computers say, at least. And just a fun little fact is that outs above average, so he was 17 outs above average last year. Every out above average is a little bit more than a run above average in terms of like how many runs he contributed, like from a defensive standpoint. And so 17 outs above average correlates to about 15 or 16 runs above average. So take that information. So almost 20 runs above average, a little bit less. And then let's go to WOBA, which every about 20 points of WOBA is worth about 10 runs of value. So if you're worth 20 runs on defense, you can take away about 40 points of WOBA, and that equals to about a Major League average player. And a 2 WAR player is about a Major League average player. And that's basically adds up to what he was last year. He had almost 20 runs saved on defense, almost 20 runs that he was negative on offense, and that made him about an average Major League starter.
And this is why I love doing this show, because this is the stuff that I feel really lucky to be doing the show with John, because he can break things down in such a digestible manner. And I know, John, before we head out and close this out, you wanted to talk about kind of team strategy and how we might deploy someone like Trent Grisham in our lineup. So,
yeah, this is just a fun history lesson. I don't know if you remember when Petco was first coming out and Phil Nevin was complaining about every ball he hit was an out, even though it normally should have been a home run. So that year, 2004, in early summer, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, as they were known at the time, came to town, and they were a bad team. They ended up going 70-91. We were a pretty decent team. We ended up going 87-75, so we were the better team. And they came to Petco Park, and they annihilated us. It was a 3-game sweep. Didn't seem like we had any chance at all. And coming out of that, there was talk about how the Tampa Bay Rays were better suited to play at Petco Park than we were. So at the time, we had Ryan Klesko commonly starting in left field. We had Jay Payton commonly starting in center field, and then Brian Giles commonly starting in right field, which is not a great defensive outfield. It's pretty bad. Jay Payton is about Major League average. Giles was a little bit below, and Klesko was way below. And at the time, Petco Park was cavernous. It was a huge park, and not only that, but it didn't have the buildings around it that make balls fly through the air a little bit better. So there were a lot more balls hit into play in Petco Park because home runs were in the field of play that maybe would be home runs. They were still in the field of play. And the Tampa Bay Devil Rays came to town, and they basically had 3 center fielders in their outfield. They had Carl Crawford in left, Rocco Baldelli up the middle, and then Jose Cruz Jr. in right field. And they were catching everything. We put a ball into the outfield, they would catch it. And it was very frustrating. And then when they came up to the plate, they were batting 1, 2, and 3 in the order. And none of them were like particular power hitters. They were more line drive, gap-to-gap players. And it seemed like they were just hitting balls into the gap and just running around the bases at will. So basically, since then, I've been thinking of Petco Park as kind of I want a great defensive outfield, and I want those players to be gap-to-gap players. However, something has changed over the course of Petco Park history, and that is that, 1, they put up the buildings, which makes balls fly a little bit better. Still not great, but better than before. And 2, we keep bringing the walls in. And so every time you bring the walls in, the total surface area of a park decreases, which means that there's less total room for outfielders to have to cover. And as we keep doing that, so the total area that outfielders have to cover decreases and balls fly a little bit more. BABIP so batting average of balls in play on like fly balls hit to our outfield keeps going down and down, because now those home runs that used to be in the field of play are home runs. Those aren't counted in BABIP, and it's easier to get to a ball because there's less total space in the outfield. And so We had the worst BABIP on fly balls in all of major leagues last year. It was 0.089, which is just remarkably bad. Average is 0.127, and then if you get to like Coors Field where there's a ton of outfield space, that's 1.95. And the leader was actually Fenway, because you hit it off any fly ball that you just barely hit and it hits the green monster, that's an automatic hit. So they led the league at 2.14, which is obviously more than double the amount that we had in our outfield last year. So just from a strategy standpoint, there's bigger outfields and smaller outfields. Like Coors is huge, Kauffman for KC is huge, Oracle with that big right center field area is huge, and they also have a wall where you can maybe not hit a ball quite as well and it'll still bounce off the wall, and that's an automatic hit. So from a strategy standpoint, I've always been thinking, I want three center fielders, I want everybody to cover all that room. There's not a lot of room. So from a roster building perspective, I would almost argue that, I want a good center fielder to patrol center field, but we can have maybe a little bit less quality defense in left and right field, because like I said, there's fewer opportunities to prove your athleticism because there's less space. Not only that, but actually in the past 3 years, we've been, and probably most people don't believe this, but we've been actually about average in home runs at Petco Park in terms of like the value of the likelihood of a home run in a given stadium. And in the summertime, it's actually above average. So you can hit home runs at our field. It's just that you can't get hits because the outfield is too small. If you don't hit a home run, it's very likely going to be an out. And so if we could have one good center fielder and two corner outfielders that are a little bit more like a standard corner outfielder wherein they can hit home runs at an average to above average rate, I think that's better for a roster construction overall for Petco Park. And where this comes into play is Tatis a center fielder or is he a right fielder? I don't know. He's already been eyeing center field. You've heard that in interviews where he's like, someday center field is for me. And that's because there's more value in center field. You have more value overall as an up-the-middle player. If Tatis is an outfielder and you put him in center field and are given the opportunity to have a right fielder, more of a standard right fielder, maybe with a strong arm and otherwise mediocre outfielder, but can hit a home run at Petco Park, which not everybody can do, but if you have normal corner outfield power, you can do that. That might be better for roster construction than to have Tatis in right with all his speed and then Grisham in center field.
Well, I think that's a great transition to kind of how we like to end our episodes. So we like to close things out with a question of what should this player's fate be on the San Diego Padres? Do we want to sign them long-term, use them while they're cheap, basically through their arbitration years, or trade them away before we even get the chance to get there? And I went first last time, so John, I want to give you the opportunity to give your take on this.
I don't want to be saying the same thing every time, but I'm still again with Grisham on I'd prefer to trade him, although not now. His value is super low right now. There's going to be a period of time, like an inflection point. Like I said, he's a streaky hitter. There's going to be a period of time in which he has good offensive numbers at either a trade deadline or the end of a season. And you're getting good defense from him. So I think of him as a between 2 and 3 WAR player just because he's going to put up value on defense no matter what. If you can get somebody to say, he might be a positive at the plate as well, then suddenly you're talking about a 4-5 WAR player and somebody might get excited on him. I don't think he's that. I think he's a relatively poor hitter. I mean, his only thing that he's really going to try to do this year is swing more often at pitches down the middle, which is just hard to do in general. Not only that, but he doesn't have great contact rates in the first place. And not only that, but when he does hit the ball, it's usually not that well hit. I don't see a huge ceiling for that, but I could see somebody being excited about his potential because all he has to do is hit major league average and suddenly he's like a 4 WAR player. That's super valuable. So I would wait till the exact time when he's hitting well, wait till somebody gets excited about him, and then trade him.
I am so glad you said that. Because I'm going to zag. I'm going to zag where you zigged. And I'm going to say we should be signing an extension for Trent Grisham before opening day. And here's my reasoning why.
Opening day.
And here's my reasoning why, and it's a lot of the same reasoning that you're using for why we should get rid of him. I want to give the assumption that I'm operating under for this, which is that Trent Grisham is the center fielder and Fernando Tatis Jr. is going to be playing in right field. And we know that's the case for this year. But kind of the same thing we said in the Crone episode last time. Fernando Tatis is such a question mark. You know, he could be so many different things to this team, and what he is, because we are pot committed to him and because he's one of the best players in baseball. Like, whatever he wants and whatever the team kind of sees him as is going to dictate a lot of this. So in this version of reality, I'm going to be saying, let's assume that he is not going to be taking center field. I think that Trent Grisham, we know what his floor is. We've seen it. Yeah. 2022 was his floor. And he hit 184. He hit one fucking 84. I made it almost an hour into the show without saying the F word, and I finally did it. He hit one fucking 84. And
and you didn't even say Marry Fuck Kill for the.
I know, yeah. It's a Marry Fuck Kill. It's a Marry Fuck Kill thing. All right, if you guys couldn't pick up on that. But he hit 184 last year, and he put up an 83 WRC plus, and he won a Gold Glove, and he was a 2 F4 player. And like that is valuable. Like that is valuable. That is something that we should be celebrating, and we should feel lucky that we have in center field, especially given the fact that the rest of our lineup has some boppers on it. Okay, looking even further into the future, there is no one, and I mean no one in our farm system that can play center field. No one. Truly no one. We have Sammy Zavala coming up, who's going to be a corner outfielder for sure. The one thing scouts are talking about is like, the one thing you can really improve on is his speed, not something you want to think about for a center fielder. We have Corey Howell, who is like a 40 to 45 ranked prospect, who is, it's not good. Like, he's just not good, I hope I'm wrong on that one, but he's not someone who I would feel thrilled about coming up. So the farm system and the pipeline is barren when it comes to who can patrol center field. And as you mentioned, Trent Grisham, if he starts just to become kind of a league average hitter, is now super valuable. And it depends on what you think about him. You've obviously said you're a little bearish on him. I'm perhaps a little more bullish, but I'm kind of thinking, and this is why I'm like, sign him before opening day. Like, this is the lowest his value is going to be. Like, I'm serious.
It's true.
Like, it really is the lowest.
True.
So if you can, I don't know, say some things to Trent Grisham that hurt his self-esteem and try and pull a Corbin Burns on him and make all these arguments to him about why he's not valuable, and say, hey, but we love you here, and we really love it to stick around and to give you this very cheap contract. It could be a key to success and locking someone in who we have stuck by, traded for, paid above our value. Maybe we could coax them into doing it. But there is the downside risk. But I'm to me, the upside and the rock solid, you're going to have a 2-time Gold Glove winner in center field. And then maybe he's something at the plate, but even if he's not, you have Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, Juan Soto, Xander Bogaerts, Jake Cronenworth in your lineup. Like, I would much rather have that security, which probably says a lot about me as a person. You can talk to my therapist if you have more questions. I love that we disagree on this, and this was a really, really fun episode about one of the more fascinating players for the Padres, Trent Grisham. So thanks again. That was episode 2 of Pods Above Replacement. Be sure to subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Just search Padres Hot Tub. It's where you'll find this show and where you'll find Padres Hot Tub sometime in the near future. And you can go and become a Patreon member, patreon.com/Padres Hot Tub. Starting at $5 a month, get this show ad-free. Join our Discord channel, join the Pods Above Replacement Discord channel to talk all about the stat-heavy side of the team and who you want to see next. But for now, my name is Raphie Cantor. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for listening. It's really been really fun to interact with you guys, especially on the Discord. I like it when you guys disagree with us. I like it when you make comments. So please feel free to do that. It's been very enjoyable.
This is a pro-conflict podcast. We welcome it. For John Precoda, I'm Raphie Cantor. Thanks again for joining us. Pods above replacement.